from America's finest city. This is Real Talk San Diego on ESPN 1700.
What's happening, gang? You are live, local, back down here in San Diego for another lovely edition of The Secret Stash. What do? We track down some cool local people. We talk about some cool local stuff with the singular goal of leaving you a little better than how we found you. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, and I'm actually flanked by my partner in crime, Jeremy Beck, longtime caller, longtime listener, and multiple Secret Stash participant. What's happening, Jeremy Beck?
Yeah, man, good to be here. Good to be here. It's like second home.
Jeremy Beck is a mortgage planner down right here in the heart of San Diego at the Greenhouse Group, and happens to be the yin to my yang.
Dang. That gets worse every time.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Or it gets really good. It depends on how long you want to let that play out. And we're helping folks get into and out of homes right down there in Mission Valley. And if you're in the market right now and you're curious about what options you might have for you right now, I invite you to come down to our website at thegreenhousegroupinc.com. And, who knows, maybe go over and meet the team and post a little question there about what's important to you. Speaking of what's important to you and posting questions, in preparation for wrapping up this year, I sat down with my buddy Jeremy. We said, what's the greatest gift we can give Stash Nation here? And what we did is we quickly looked back and we said, man, there were some big lessons, some big themes in 2015. So what if we took the time to sort of distill that down and share that in a easily swallowable pill? And so we crunched down to what our 7 top lessons for 2015, right? And most importantly, what you can do to apply those to a prosperous 2016. Yeah. So, Jer, I know you head up the number stuff. There was a lot of number stuff going on. My contribution to the Greenhouse Group is more from a real estate perspective. And one thing, if I can kick this party off, which was interesting, is that this is a time for the seasons again. San Diego is curious as a real estate market because there's not a lot of seasons. Like, we don't have like snow on the ground, which basically, truncates our, 6 months out of the year. Like, we're pretty good, man. It's 60 to 70 to 80, 12 months out of the year. Very little rain, unfortunately. So we usually roll right through. But if you look back over the last, 2-3 years, you can see that we've had a very normalized market, which people would think typically spring, summer, best time to sell, and then beginning of the year, and then the winter, like sort of the shoulder months in between, falling off. And that's exactly what happened. If you look back over this year, one of the first takeaways is trying to time the market for buying or selling. Now, it's interesting because it's kind of like, the analogy of picking stocks.
Right.
Because like, there's that old adage, like, typically if you're trying to pick a stock because you heard about it, it's usually too late.
Right.
And I think that's an exact replica of what happens in the real estate market because, you're trying to get the lowest amount of competition, which is going to hopefully yield a little scarcity, which is going to get you the highest yield on your sale when you're selling. And then conversely, as a buyer, you want to try to have the most opportunity available, but then you don't also want to be fraught with all the competition in the world, right? You can see there's positives and negatives to each. So when you're trying to time the market, gang, which is almost an impossible feat, what is like a lesson that you could learn about trying to go against the herd, right? So if the most sales are happening right now over the last 3 years in spring and summer, that might mean that you got a lot of options to choose from. But what's the unintended consequence to that, Jer?
Interesting. Well, you're up against everybody else.
Exactly. Yeah. And in San Diego, at least this has been the case, Scott, for almost as long as I can remember, maybe with the only exception being when everything kind of disintegrated there in like 06, 07. When you're in the peak months, man, I mean, people are knocking their mother-in-laws down flights of stairs to get their name on contracts. And they get a little artificially inflated, right? So if you're trying to time this as a seller, your goal is to be best in class. That's it. Doesn't matter what month of the year it is. If you're best in class, You're going to get the highest possible dollar. You're going to get the best possible terms on your contract, and you're going to get the least fickle process when you go through, right? That's the way it is. So, yeah, there could be the most pool of buyers in those peak months, but it also means that you're going to have competition about you being best in class.
Sure.
Right? Because there are going to be other sellers out there the same way it's juxtaposed for buyers. So give me an argument about maybe selling in the wintertime.
Yeah, where there's less competition.
Exactly.
Sure.
Like, why would that make sense for a seller?
It's funny when you mentioned San Diego and there not being necessarily a physical preventing components like the snow or the winter or the weather. People are actually out looking. If you can actually get into a space where there's less competition and you're standing out, there's still people out there willing to buy who maybe didn't get to in that crunch time. Maybe they got outbid. Maybe they got bummed out because they kept losing their bid, and now they're just hanging back, and all of a sudden you pop up in the middle of winter. Yeah, it sounds reasonable to me. And that's an exact. So in the course of my career, what's shouldn't be surprising, but seems like it always is we pull off some of the best deals in like December, because what's left, and this is the big lesson that I've got for trying to pick the seasons, is that if you're trying to buy in maybe one of these off months, you're probably working with a very motivated seller that needs to sell. And if you're trying to sell, it's probably a reason why you're out there trying to sell. And if there's a buyer out there still, they're not a fickle, fair weather buyer. They're out there because they need to buy, right? And that's why they're not. So yeah, there's always a case made because the highest amount of sales and usually the most or the most amount of listings and usually the most solds are right there kind of peaking around like June, early spring, right there around midsummer. But there is a strong case that happens year and year again of trying to off-time the market. And maybe, and I'm not saying that's an ideal approach. Like, don't wait in the middle of summer not to be looking. But if you happen to find yourself here at the end of the year or in the first quarter of the year, which is what we call the New Year's hangover for real estate, don't quit. If you're a seller, don't pull your home off the market. And if you're a buyer, don't give up the fight until spring because you might be able to pull off a fantastic deal right now. So that's from the real estate side. Sure. Is there a similar case you can make for the mortgage side? I love it because I wanted to talk about not trying to time the rates today. Okay. And I get this a lot. I meet with somebody and maybe they're in a refinance or purchase process. And the way we do it is a little bit unique in that we show the clients the rates every day. And we just pass them through because of the way we structured our financing. We're fully transparent. So we just show them what the lender's rates are every day. And does it change every day? It changes every day, sometimes more than once a day. So they're extremely volatile. Even though if you pan back, it feels like rates have been low for a while and, it's kind of flat over time. Every day they change, sometimes more than once. And this is what people don't realize. But when you get pre-approved to go shop for a home, you're basing it on a rate. You are, but you have to overestimate that rate if we're doing your pre-approval properly because the truth is you're not locked in until you find a home. You need an address. You need a place that you're actually counting on because when you lock a rate, it's for a given amount of time. You obviously can't do that until you found a home. Yeah. So that's volatile. But more importantly, I'm talking about when you're in the transaction. When you're in the transaction, a lot of people want to wait and gamble. So I have this client. I'm going to call him John for his privacy, of course. But we're in a purchase process. All Johns out there just flinched, by the way. Yeah. There probably is a John that did this. And we were in the purchase process, and I was showing him rates every day, and he kept saying, I heard they're going to go down. I heard they're going to go down. You sure they're pretty good? Yeah, I heard they're going to go down. Let's wait. And despite my best efforts to convince him to lock on some really good days, we watched the rates go up a little every day during this process. He stuck to his guns, and he kept waiting for them to go down, but eventually he had to lock at a higher rate than he really wanted. And that was because he was trying to time the market. Now, this was a unique spot. But you can't fault him for doing that, right? So it sounds like from your story it was a sort of a rate escalating environment. And if history proves itself, there's been a lot of fluctuation. So what goes up historically has been coming back down. But my point is this. He had a rate that he was attracted to. He wanted to get it a little bit better. Oh, I see. So because of something he had heard. I see. And so this was during the period of November to October. And at the end of November to October, rates went up 0.33% in about a week. This is the volatility we're talking about. So my thought is more bird in the hand. can you afford the payment with the way rates are? And historically speaking, they are amazing. And I think it's silly to try to just hope for something to go in your favor when what we're seeing is that rates are just trending upward. It's very unlikely that we're going to see things just happen to pop down right in time for you. So the idea is to get a rate that works for you and lock it in when you can so that you don't have the disappointment of rates peeling up on you.
That's interesting. Now, how often, you mentioned the word volatility about rates a little bit earlier, like so when someone gets pre-approved for a home to the time they actually find one where they can begin the process of actually locking in their rate, as you say, right?
Right.
What's the measured volatility you can sort of expect in between those two, based on your experience?
Well, I pre-approve people about 0.5% in rate higher than I think they're actually going to get. And that's to account for that volatility. Now, the truth is that you're not going to see a ton of movement from day to day, but over time you can see it. So in that example I gave, during that week, rates went up 0.25% in a week. Now, that was a little bit of an anomaly, but that's what could happen. And when you're talking about your home, you're talking about your purchase, and you're talking about the cost of money over that entire life of that loan, that can be a very expensive mistake.
Well, you mentioned not trying to time the market for rates, but from the example that you gave, it doesn't sound like you get to time too much because you're out there, you're pre-approved, you're shopping for home, you find a home, and then you basically have to perform in 30 to maybe 45 days. Yeah. So which means you kind of have to lock. What do you have, like within a 2-week window at the most?
Pretty much, but that's where you see these things happen. I mean, again, that example I gave, that was 1 week. Rates went up 0.25%. Now, typically they're not going to do that very often, but it's the same thing. They're trending one way or the other. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. And in my experience, one of the things that I do from a financial perspective is I end up being an emotional leader. I'm dealing with people's emotions because money is very emotional. And what happens is when I see their rates go up because they waited or chose not to lock, I see them very disappointed. When rates go down, no one's ever throwing a party, whipping out the kazoo, and, the party. Like, it's just not happening. So I think that it bodes better for people to protect themselves from increasing rates than to gamble for the lower rate. That's, in my experience, that's what I've seen.
That's very interesting. Gang, this is the time of year right now. If you can think about sort of parsing back and reflecting. Everybody loves talking about New Year's resolutions, New Year's goals. It's a very future-oriented thing, and you got to do that. There's no question about that. But there's also equal amount of opportunity that's created when you look back and you reflect on the year that was, and you draw out whatever lessons you can from the ground that you already covered. Would you not agree?
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do with you here, gang. It's another year in the books and another 7 lessons that we learned. Sometimes you're the chicken, and sometimes it's feathers, right? So sometimes you fell on your face, sometimes you look pretty good. But we tried to grab the 7 most essential points and bring them to you here live so that you can look at the year in review and, most importantly, how to apply them to your 2016 campaign. So, gang, coming up. By the way, I can't wait to hear about you. I think you're going to give us a little tease on the old Fed hike, the rate that happened, a week or two ago, and how that's going to impact potential buyers and sellers in this market. And then I'll share what's the number 2 reason that Chargers don't want to leave this beautiful city. We'll leave that little tease, gang, coming right back after this. So stick around. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.